Good afternoon. I want to say thank you enormously for having me back again this year to chat about my experience in teaching philosophy, in particular using the philosophy for children pedagogy in my work. Anya suggested I should take about 5 minutes, and it was then that I thought, well, I've been using P4C since the turn of the century. I could talk about P4C for 5 minutes without drawing breath, and I could really get lost in it. I've worked in all sorts of settings: state, private, primary, secondary, although the majority of my work has been as a head of department in a secondary school of one sort or another. And I moved to Ireland again, back to Ireland in September, so this is the first year since the turn of the century that I haven't had a gaggle of children to work with. It seems quite strange. And I thought perhaps I could talk at length about my own experience, or I could maybe bring some children here, or at least their voices. I have taught literally thousands of children, and I've had hundreds of communities, and a lot of those children are now adults and they still keep in touch with me, which is a great pleasure and privilege of being a teacher. So, as is the age, I put a wee shout out on social media, and I said to any past students, any past teachers who'd like to share their experience of P4C, of philosophising with me in the classroom, to come forward. And I was inundated, and it was lovely. But I've had to select a few because we would be here until tomorrow if I were to read them all out. All these students that I've picked are now at university. The first one I'd like to speak about is Catherine Marriott Brown. This was an estate school, nothing fancy, lots of fun, lots of intelligent colleagues and eager students. So she said, "We were encouraged to understand philosophy as something which we as young people could contribute, and that our contributions were valid and important, without the need to have studied in detail the theories of Heidegger or Aristotle. Through open and structured debate in the classroom, I learned to actively question my assumptions and the assumptions of my peers. This may sound like I'm pushing it, but with reflection, I really believe that the enjoyment which myself and many of my peers got out of these sessions gave us a framework in which to engage in respectful debate, which would very often contribute beyond the classroom. Any career in filmmaking requires a strong ability to listen and communicate, as well as a willingness to push your own and others' creative ideas to their furthest conclusions. I am grateful to have been given the opportunity to have begun developing these skills in the philosophy classroom in Key Stage 3. Catherine is currently studying for a BA in film practice at the University of the Arts in London." The next voice I'd like to bring in is Alexander Callion. I remember Alex really clearly as an 11-year-old twin. He was very, very articulate, a bright young man who was convinced he should be a judge as an adult, that the world needed him as a judge, and that the death penalty needed reintroduced as quickly as possible. During that year, he spoke about the death penalty a lot, and I suspect he remembers this whenever he contacted me. He said, "P4C was hands down one of the most eye-opening, intellectually stimulating experiences of my high school day, aside from being great fun. While I was known to sometimes openly disagree with my teacher and classmates on the topics being discussed, I had my ideas challenged, learned to accept other people having different views, and learned that everyone has an equally important voice. I was also introduced to critical thinking, which would later challenge many of my ideals. P4C is a tool that I solemnly believe grants children a tolerant, open-minded, intellectual space where they can learn that they have a voice and speak their ideas, but also have them challenged. It builds foundations for tolerant, free-thinking adults. I feel utterly privileged to have experienced P4C. You'll be pleased to know that following a gap year, Alex is currently reading physics at King's College London and has decided to step away from the judiciary. Áras O'Shea is someone who sticks really acutely in my mind, not least because we shared a love of Ireland, you can tell by the surname. Her mother worked in intensive care as a nurse and was a single parent. And Áras and her sister Summer worked really hard at school and were very interested students, but lived very much in the real world. She wrote to me to say, "The P4C classes I took at school showed me the importance of collaborating with people of different viewpoints and experiences in order to encourage creative discussion and effectively solve problems. During my philosophy classes, I improved my ability to creatively explore a given stimuli, collectively convey my thoughts, and broaden my perspective on the world through listening to and debating ideas with classmates. By approaching the learning syllabus in such a way, topics which I was previously reluctant to study became effortless to understand. I am now studying physics at Imperial College London, and I have just finished an internship at Google. Despite my passion for science and technology, I would say ultimately my ability to explore and approach problems fluently in a variety of different ways enables me to be a successful engineer, qualities which P4C helped me to develop." I also remember Rob. Rob was a rather unhappy boy until he started doing P4C. He obviously liked to comfort eat, and within 6 months of P4C sessions had lost half his body weight in a very healthy fashion and spoke openly about that journey. That in itself, to my mind, was very interesting. Anyway, he dropped me a line, which I've started to cut these down a bit now. We could will be here all day. He said, "P4C taught me not only how to think for myself, but how to think from the perspective of others. It taught me to be a considerate listener when I was only keen to voice the thoughts whizzing around in my own mind." He's currently reading pharmacy at the University of Bath. He represents the British Pharmaceutical Students Association as well as his department, and he says he's looking forward to working in the NHS when he leaves. I could go on with students, but I thought it might be interesting to hear feedback from a couple of school leaders. I worked extensively with York Primary School in my spare time, and in the holidays primarily, since 2012, to help embed philosophy for children into that particular environment. And the principal there, Lucille Pollard, shared her thoughts with me. She said, "P4C has given everyone at York Mead a voice. I listen to their points of view, and at times forget I am in a primary school, such is the maturity of thought that has developed. However, most pleasing is that the voice of some of the SEN or seemingly lower attainers is heard, and suddenly everyone is listening to an idea that can be voiced by a child who may struggle to pen it." I think I'd like to end now with words from my, probably the person who encouraged me the most. He was probably the person that it can honestly say he was my boss. There aren't very many people who would really claim to be my boss. I'm so headstrong, but I think he would probably say that he was. He was a deputy headmaster at Rickmansworth School, and he wrote to say, "The effect of P4C was to engage the students and to keep them focused while simultaneously getting them to question and critically evaluate. They were behind the wheel driving, but looking for hazards and anticipating or imagining the unexpected. The experience is pure education, in the sense of educere, to lead out, but there is also something of the educara, to train and mould too." He would be so proud that I got some Latin in, even if he gave me the words to begin with. Thank you very much for gathering today. Thank you for